Hey everybody, so this is my first attempt at doing a design diaries recording. In this, I'm going to be talking about the Genrenauts role-playing game, where I am with it right now, the kind of aspects of design that I'm working on, and the stuff that is like challenging me and that I'm trying to see how I can make into the version that I'm really excited about and is worth or in a position to start sharing with you, the patrons, first, and then more broadly, so that I can get some feedback outside of the private playtests that I have been running myself. So here you can see the October 2021 draft. We're at version 0.6. This is basically so that at some point I'll have a version point 0.1, and that will be the equivalent of version 10, version 1.0. So I'm at 0.6. So this is like pre-alpha. The numbering is just for my own brain. Um, I've got some overview stuff here. If you're a patron, you've already seen a version of the game that's mostly like this. The stuff that I want to talk about for right now is kind of the campaign scale of how the game works. So I'm going to scroll very quickly, and that has a lot to do with region playsets. So in each region, um, there's a bunch of different aspects because the regions are the equivalent of like a play sheet in a different Forged in the Dark game. In something like Girl by Moonlight, there's four different like campaign sheets or series um, playbooks. I think they're called in the playtest draft that I got to look at. In Genrenauts, rather than your crew having a sheet, you kind of have a there's a play sheet for each region that is in your team's beat. So there's a sheet for all the information about modern action, and then there's a sheet for rom-com, and then there's a sheet for the westerns, and then there's a sheet for sci-fi. And okay, those are the four regions that your team has as their beat, and that way when you're on a mission, you're looking at your own character sheet and you're looking at the region playset. I wanted to minimize the number of different pages that a player had to be looking at the same time, and that includes the GM, because I didn't want the GM to necessarily have to have like five different pages up just to cover the different subsections of the game. Like, oh, okay, well here's character sheet, and then there's a crew sheet, and then there's a region sheet, and then there's something else. It's still going to be there's going to be some complication and some complexity just because you're dealing with an interdimensional kind of series. It's the kind of game where you have to key shift, and you have to shift your brain between thinking in different genres logics. But I wanted the play sheets to feel pretty comprehensive, and because Genrenauts has like a meta plot that I wrote in the fiction version, that like if I get to finish the series in terms of more novellas, that will play out and people will get to see it. But this game probably will come out before I'm done with the series, and so people are going to kind of come to understand at least one of the versions of the meta plot. That's probably the meta plot I'm using in the fiction. Spoilers, it's that thing. It's fine. Um, and so what I wanted to do with the game and what I would like to, the place I'd like to get to before I release the next version is to have kind of the campaign scale rules figured out. And what that looks like is going beyond the mission by mission play cycle of you get a mission, you do your recon, you deploy, or you do your intel phase and your intel questions. Then you get in the ship, you deploy, you do your recon phase or legwork, and then you do a mission. And then when you're done with the mission, you come back and then you do fallout slash resolution. You have entanglements, you get your rep, you apply ripple, and so on. That's the mission cycle. But I want to have a cool campaign cycle where the progression of missions and downtime and missions and downtime and the interplay between the different story regions is like becomes its own engine for storytelling and for the game itself. And so what I've come up with that a few things that I've come up with that I'm deciding between and seeing if I want to apply one or more of them all at the same time. First is this idea of a region plotline clock. And so the idea here is that in each region, there would be a plot line, and that the first mission, you do something, and then at the end of the mission, there's some supporting characters who maybe would come back in another story. And every time you complete a mission in a region, you would advance the region clock. And that clock would probably have 3 or 4 ticks. And when that clock was full, you would maybe unlock a special mission, or and that mission would be about concluding the storyline that had been playing out in this region across a season. Like in the Genrenauts fiction, I'm thinking about like season and series language for Genrenauts, and a lot of other RPGs have appropriated that language of TV seasons. Um, and I think it's really handy, and it can provide internal structure where maybe you don't have to plan for 50 or 100 episodes or 50 or 100 sessions of your game. That's a whole campaign. You can think in seasons, and then you play a dozen to 20 or so sessions, and that's a season of your game. It maybe gives you the opportunity to hand off the GM hat to somebody else and play somebody else's game, or to trade who's GMing within a campaign, like the way that the crew of Rivals of Waterdeep does with their D&D series. And so the idea in here is that in a given season of Genrenauts, you might progress an entire plot line in each of your genre regions. So if we're using the same four, we'd have the modern action plot line for the season, you'd have the rom-com plot line for the season, you'd have the western plot line, you'd have the sci-fi plot line, and then maybe there's like a season plot line that combines several of these plot lines. And then some of the region plot lines are part of the season plot, and some of them are their own thing, so that region plots get to be subplots within the season structure. And having this kind of fractal structure and tools for having a subplot within an individual mission, subplots within a season, and the meta plot of a season, like that lets you have it gives the GMs and players some tools for being able to keep track of things, and to have aspects of the story in the game advancing at different paces, because there is a great deal there's like satisfaction and joy and excitement in resolving a plot line. But if you're playing a 25 session season, you're not going to get the season resolution as often. So then you want smaller stories and smaller resolutions that pay off. Here I'm drawing a bit on Mary Robinette Kowal's version of the mice quotient, in terms of thinking really in a structuralist fashion about elements of story within a broader narrative, so that you'd have like, here's a little subplot that feeds into that subplot, and then the first plot ends, and then the second plot ends. So in a region plot line, the idea would be that the players would be able to keep track of what's going on in each region, and then they might be able to look at what's happening in character and draw some parallels or some connections between plot lines in different regions, if the season or series plot is about stories in different regions connecting with one another. So some other possibilities I have here is that when you finish a storyline clock and complete a special mission, maybe you would then you'd get some kind of mechanical reward for completing the storyline in that arc. Maybe that is a region advance where your team gets some kind of special ability. It might be a more fundamental change in how the narrative physics of that region operates. So you might change one core element or expectation of the region. I also had the idea that the storyline clock could be a tug of war clock, where the team is trying to advance their clock while there's some other force pulling or pushing against them. And so that could be tug of war clock, where a clock goes back and forth, or it could be racing clocks, where the team is trying to finish their storyline clock before like the breach clock fills, or maybe like there's an antagonistic faction that is also pursuing some agenda in this region. And I have a question of like, does the GM move these clocks during the faction turn? And the faction turn I believe I trace it in terms of what I understand and what I've heard about to the game Stars Without Number, where faction turn is just extra structure for the GM's prep, and it represents the rest of the world acting. And faction turn and faction agenda shows up in Blaze in the Dark, and therefore flows into a lot of Forge in the Dark games. So region plotline is one element of campaign skill design that I'm thinking about because it's not about individual missions. It's something that describes and provides tools for the broader storytelling in a Genrenauts campaign that is about what individual missions add up to, or that individual missions are the inputs into a broader flywheel that give you then narrative outputs. Because in Blaze in the Dark, you have in a mission, you get heat, and then heat informs other things and feeds into other things. You get coin, and you use coin to get extra actions, and that feeds into certain things. You get coins to do downtime. And when you do missions, you also get rep, and rep feeds toward tier, but missions also will impact your statuses with different factions. And so the activity of doing a mission produces all of these outputs that then feed into other aspects of the game, and they're all interconnected like this cool big clockwork machine, where if you get more heat, it moves this thing over here, and then that connects with your wanted level. It interconnects with entanglements and so on and so forth. So another idea that I had was the question of region advances, and region advances would be like crew abilities, where when you get a region advance, everybody on the team has access to it. So in the modern action world, old hands, select one special ability from this region. All members of your team possess this ability while in this region. That's not about an individual character having specialty. That's about saying, oh, your team is more familiar with this region writ large, and they're all able to access some special ability that reflects like expertise or belongingness in the region. In this case, it would be the modern action region. You could have tough as nails, where it means like all of the characters are tougher in this world. And so the idea of region advances would be that maybe you don't take a region advance when you fill the region clock. Instead, or when you fill the region XP, instead you have to fill the region clock, and then you get an advance. Right now, the region, like each region has its own XP track, and then when you fill the track, you would get a region advance. I've thought about having like region specific crew upgrades that are more like, training, workshop, things like that. But I think having to keep track of the group's working space in each region might be a little bit more granular than I'm interested in, like encouraging the players to do. Like, oh, okay, this is the amount of detail that I'm setting you up to need to use. I don't know that I want to give them that much detail. It may come in later. I might change my mind. I am thinking about having HQ-based crew upgrades, but I'll get to that in just a minute. So this brings me to an idea that I'm really excited about, and I'm not totally sure how I want to implement it. I've got a version that I think is good for right now, but I may change it, and I think it may also be a place that I provide some alternatives in like the kind of advanced rules or campaign variants. And that's this idea of a breach advance. So in the Genrenauts game, I have Ripple as a replacement for Heat from Blades in the Dark. So when you do a mission, your presence as somebody from another dimension will automatically cause ripples in whatever story dimension that you're in. So the kind of heavier a hand and the more of an impact, the more you put your thumb on the scale of the story, the higher the ripple for your mission is going to be. And ripple goes into the region track. So each region would have a ripple track that goes from 0 to 9. And when ripple hits 9 in that track, the region enters breach. I had a few different ideas of what it means when a region enters breach. Right now, a region entering breach means that the GM will select a breach advance. And the breach advances are ways that the narrative physics of that region break bad. These are mostly ways in which the world becomes more cynical and gritty and dark and or nihilistic. So in the modern action world, you might have gritty realism. The days where heroes can walk away without a scratch are now firmly in the past. The camera lingers on every scratch, bruise, and cut as the story drags your characters through hell on the way to the ending. So this represents the difference between an action movie like stuff that's in the tradition of Die Hard or maybe the John Wick movies, where the heroes get beat to crap and you really feel that weighing on them, even when you get to like the finale where they have to do really cool things and beat the boss or something. In a region without gritty realism, the characters are more larger than life. Um, there are a lot of abilities in the modern action region that allow characters to ignore or downplay harm. And so you might have a combination where you have some of those abilities, but then gritty realism applies and you get pulled down some. I've also had the idea that one version of a campaign, you might pick a breach advance for each of the regions where you're active, because then the characters can be trying to undo that breach. They can be trying to make the modern action world less gritty and nihilistic. This kind of comes from the idea of, okay, what if your epic fantasy world has the grimdark breach advance and it has a similar effect to gritty realism? And so your heroes could be trying to make the epic fantasy dimension that they're operating in less grimdark. They're trying to pull it back from grimdark to more traditional or heroic epic fantasy. What that does, if you start each campaign with a breach advance, then the Genrenauts team and therefore the players are proactive trying to change a bad status quo, whereas in the fiction by default, until the kind of the metaplot gets going, the Genrenauts are really reactive. They are trying to protect a good status quo. They are inherently small c conservative. They're trying to keep things as they are. If instead I want more of the flavor of Blades in the Dark and some of the other Forged in the Dark games where the characters and their group together are trying to change the world toward their own goals. So in Blades in the Dark, they're trying to become a bigger, badder crew and make their gang more important. In Genrenauts, the characters are more like firefighters, like they're trying to address problems that pop up. But if you have breach advances in each region to begin with, then in addition to having to deal with individual breaches within the story worlds, the characters have something bigger that they could be pursuing, and that region clock, the region storyline clock, could be about filling the clock, and then when that clock is full, you go on a special mission that is specifically addressing that breach advance and trying to change the status quo. And so then if you succeed in that special mission, you could undo the breach advance and kind of pull the region back away from this like darker, more nihilistic, grittier version of itself. This reflects the ways that expectations and of tone and like cultural reflections of societal visions of themselves and how like society and people work, that they change back and forth, and that they swing. So you have a time period where dark and gritty heroes, anti-heroes, and like nihilistic stories are more common, and then you get a swing the other direction where more heroic, more aspirational, more kind of bright and shiny characters or storylines are more popular. And if Genrenauts is a representation and a sandbox for meditating on the ways that stories and society reflect one another and inform one another, then breach advances and getting rid of them kind of represent that tug of war as well. I think breach advances are really cool. I've had some other ideas about maybe how they could work. There's a version of breach advances where during session 0, you pick the regions that you want to work, and then the players, including the GM together, basically write down the core tenets of why this subgenre region operates the way that it does. So if you had modern action as a subgenre, as one of your genre regions, you might write down 3 or 4 sentences that are the kind of the core pillars of how this region operates. So for like a modern action region, it would be all stories trend toward action sequences. Or you might have another tenet that says violence is the language of debate. You might have a tenet that says there's always one bullet left in the gun. That represents like a certain tendency in action movies where bullets don't run out, or when when a hero like pulls the magazine from their gun, they always have at least one bullet left. And what that does is it requires more kind of director level thinking from the group in identifying the kind of the core elements of what makes a genre itself and what is most important in modern action or westerns or something like that. The idea then with breach advances is that when there is a breach, the GM would look at one of those kind of statements of dimensional physics and change it. That gives the group a lot more versatility and flexibility. They don't have to use the individual breach advances. They can kind of play at a higher storyteller level, but that that might be asking the group to play at a high level when a lot of people don't necessarily want to. So right now I'm thinking about that right down the tenants version as maybe being like an advanced rules or a campaign alternative option, because I also really like writing out the breach advances, because just as Genrenauts in prose was a way for me to talk about what I think about stories, why I think they're important, what the relationship between any given genre is, and culture writ large, breach advances do that in this game. And they give players tools for engaging with the different ways that a region might trend darker, more nihilistic, more cynical, which is really, I think that that could be really interesting. And as I've talked about it with people, I've gotten some very positive responses. So I want to do some playtesting where breach advances are part of the game and see how see how people engage with it, what they think about it, whether they like that idea of becoming proactive and trying to undo something, or whether a new breach advance showing up as Ripple applies feels like the kind of escalation in the story that gets players excited and makes them feel like they're a bit on their back foot and then have to really step up or come up with new plans. So that is something else I'm excited about. I have already talked about campaign, basically like crew upgrades. And so I'm going to scale back here to the section where I have those written out, which is somewhere in here. So I don't have this like bookmarked and chapter figured, so I'm just gonna do okay. Yeah, so it's right after playbooks, note to self. So I do think I'm going to have a team sheet, and maybe rather than team sheet, I would call it like campaign sheet. Let's try that. And what that looks like, so I've got this play sheet set. This is what a genre sheet would look like. And then there would be a separate sheet on your kind of, if you're using this, if you have Roll20, you'd have a different document in Roll20. And so there'd be a campaign sheet. And on that campaign sheet, you would track readiness, you would track dimensional instability, you would track these crew upgrades and team assets. And basically right now I have two types of upgrades that go on the crew sheet. Team assets are like crew upgrades from other Forged in the Dark games. And these are things that are less about special abilities your crew has, your team has, and more about specific resources they have in the HQ. And so this is stuff that is in the HQ rather than in the group's ready room, which is another section that I have that we'll get to in just a moment. So crew assets, team assets would be something like dedicated medical staff, where you get a bonus to recovery rolls. It's all of the training upgrades. So training for body might be an exceptional gymnasium, awards 2 XP for body training action. you might have customized roleplay scripts to give 2 XP per heart training action. Proxy agents are like having a cohort. You have a non-Genrenauts teams working for you in each world on your beat. Making the team take the cohort upgrade each time for each different region feels like a lot. And so I think I'd rather have, okay, you have proxy agents. There are some proxy agents in each region. We'll see. This might end up being too many things to keep track of. And players might like more having, oh, they have a team here and they don't have a team here. Some of this, like, take it once versus take it multiple times, is also going to be a question of pacing and XP, where in a season of Genrenauts, like if I'm expecting a given campaign to average 30 sessions, okay, what are groups spending their XP on across that whole timeline? Do they get to session 25 and feel like there's nothing else to spend XP on? If that is the case, then I can turn the dial from more of these upgrades being things where you buy them once and you get them everywhere to things where you have to buy them several times. The next idea that I'm playing with, and I think is fun, especially for certain types of players that like thinking about decorating or living in a space. So this is the Ready Room. It kind of replaces claims on the claims map, because on your crew sheet you would have like you would have a chunk, like basically a piece of the sheet with squares or slots, and then you would put your Ready Room upgrades in those slots. So if you're a clearance level 0 team, you're really not very established. You're probably a team that was just assembled. And so you're going to have basically the smallest Ready Room. So you're not going to have as much space for personalization or for team specific assets that are just in your Ready Room. And so looking at the Genrenauts series, that team was pretty established. And so they had, they had a little kitchenette, they had the cardio station that Roman was always like jogging or running on. They had like couches for the group. And so that team is probably like clearance level 1 or clearance level 2. The Ready Room upgrades have a slot requirement. So a nap couch only takes one slot, whereas comfy seating takes 2 slots. A nap couch is like for 1 person at a time. Comfy seating is more broadly. Your team gains 1 readiness at the end of downtime versus 1 member of the team may mark a tick to a recovery clock or recover 1 stress during downtime. A lot of this stuff may change. I like the idea of multiple slots. This is also kind of borrowing on something like State of Decay, the video games, where each of the bases that you have has certain capacity and slots. It's like, okay, big upgrade slots and small upgrade slots or something like that. I didn't really play the game very much, but I've watched streams. And so the idea here is that there's a bit of, there could be negotiation in the team of, well, I really want us to have a cardio station, but that's 2 slots and we're clearance level 0. So we only get 1 other slot. Okay, well, what other 1 slot thing could we be happy with? Or do we need to wait on the cardio station and then take several 1 slot options? And this is just a small set that I've built out. What I would want is to have enough that there's more different, like, okay, you're a clearance level 0 team and you have 3 slots. I would want there to be at least 3 options for 1 slot upgrades, so that you could just all have 1s. Then when your team goes up clearance levels, you gain access to additional slots. You're moved into larger Ready Rooms and you get to kind of add new modules. I don't know that I'm going to require the module, like that these upgrades are something you have to spend advances on. It may be that, okay, one of the benefits of going up a clearance level is that you get to kind of redo your room and that you get to add or change things around. Also, some of these Ready Room upgrades are upgraded versions of smaller things. So Research Nook is 1 slot. A Research Station is 2 slots, and it replaces Research Nook. It gives the same ability plus something else. That lets a group kind of keep their ready room a little bit more similar by just getting the better and better version of most of the same things, so that the core of what that room feels like can be the same. It could just be kind of the cooler and more useful version of the same type of upgrade. This also gives you the opportunity to like have somebody like do a room layout of what everything looks like, so that instead of, okay, well, here's your little three boxes and you just write what you have in each of those boxes, you might then put on your crew sheet a top down image of, here's the cardio, here's the nap couches, here's your meeting area. Because like there are people who like expressing or like having part of the game be that kind of visual expression, and like maybe it makes it easier to imagine, like, okay, yeah, we've literally written, we've drawn the layout of this space, so when you're having a scene in this space, cool, you've got this image, and people can move around on it using tokens and roll 20, or you print it out and you've got it on the table between you, and like that could be really fun. This is also just like a bit different from the way that other Forged in the Dark games do it. Like the claims map aspect is in Blades in the Dark, and then it shows up in some other games. And some games replace claims map with, okay, here's a set of different things that you can get. But it's about, you know, the thing that's cool about the claims map is, for me, the way that it engages with factions, and that you have to take something from somebody else to get it, and that like certain things are farther away from where you start, and so you have to kind of carve a path to them. In this, there's more versatility in some ways, but rather than being able to like do a job to take a claim in Genrenauts, what you have to do is get approval from HQ or from the High Council that your clearance level is increased. You're being rewarded as a team, and one of the ways that you're rewarded is that you have more space that you can customize with these various upgrades. And I think that's pretty fun. And I think that is what I want to talk about today in this first Genrenauts RPG design diary. So these are a few different like aspects of the game that I'm chewing on that all operate at the campaign scale. So this is not just what's happening inside the mission loop of, you're in a mission, you're done with a mission, you're in a mission, you're done with a mission. Like that scale of play, I've run play tests I feel pretty good about, because I've played and run a lot of Forged in the Dark games, and I have a sense of what makes an individual mission fun. Plus, Genrenauts is about doing missions, and the fiction has notable chunks that are about that kind of larger scale, like between mission play and some of the kind of team high council dynamic. But I felt like I got to a place pretty quickly where I was happy with the mission structure, because I'm using Forge in the Dark because the mission structure is good. And so I'm spending more time thinking about this campaign scale, because I think if I reach a point where the campaign scale is really interesting and engaging, but not overwhelming for players, we could have I could have a game where some people are more interested in individual missions, and they're less interested in the kind of storyline clock or like customizing the ready room with these different upgrades. And that's fine as long as at least one or two people in the group are interested in some facet of the game. They have something to like dial in on and get excited about. Maybe they take ownership of it. Like one person in the team is like the interior decorator who is in charge of what is in the ready room, and then somebody else is like, okay, they've got their specialties. They're more like the person who shows up, does the job, and goes home, and they're not doing as much of like the group admin, kind of found family aspect, either with their character or kind of as a player, in terms of like making the space that the group is operating within seem homey, or like optimizing it. Some of this aspect and the question of giving different people different roles within the group and within play draws a fair bit on what I've seen in the game Band of Blades, which was I think it was originally going to be one of the Blades in the Dark Kickstarter stretch goals, but it's one of the games that turned into its whole own thing. So it's like a 400-page role-playing book, and it has different roles that the players play. So they are like in a campaign, player A will play a soldier in the Legion in any given mission, and then in between missions, they will be the quartermaster or the marshal of the Legion. And then the players are all still playing with each other, but they're operating at the macro Legion scale, making decisions for the whole group rather than just individual squads. And the idea of being able to move back and forth between these registers of play is really interesting. And what I'm doing is not quite that, because I'm not saying have one player be like the ready room layout designer and have one person be like the costumer, and you have this many resources to come up with this many different costumes in different genres. That's a little more fiddly than I think I want for this game. But those are places where I could see an expansion or gesturing toward greater complexity. Maybe that kind of stuff goes into an advanced rules section, or if I do like an expansion book and say, okay, here are ways that you can increase the complexity of some aspect of how Genrenauts operates, in case there's someone who's really interested in that, or you find that you want extra things for the players to be working on or chewing on or interacting with over the course of your game. So I want to say thank you again to all of my patrons, who are the ones who get to see this first. I might make these design diaries public at some point, like way later on, but I've really enjoyed sharing the design process with my patrons. It's a fun way for me to make sure that they're getting like access to really cool things while I'm not writing as many different essays, because the industry is kind of in a mess right now, and a lot of things are still on holding patterns, and like supply lines are screwed, and a lot of the types of things that I engage with, like going to conventions and hand selling at conventions, are just not happening as much, if they're happening at all, especially in different parts of the world where vaccine access is not has not been as great, and so people are under more strict lockdown, things like that. Like I know there have been conventions lately, but I didn't go. I don't necessarily want to start going back to conventions just yet, even though I love conventions. But Genrenauts is this big thing that I'm working on. I'm having a lot of fun. It's new. It's a different type of storytelling work for me, and I hope you all are enjoying getting this inside look at the Genrenauts role-playing game design. Thanks. See you next time.